Part 1. The air of off-night sky over Nevada was darker than usual when something strange happened. A bright flash lit up the desert for just a moment, like lightning but different. Most people in the small town of Silver Springs missed it completely. They were either asleep or watching TV in their homes, not knowing that their quiet little world was about to change forever. In the middle of nowhere, surrounded by sand and rocks, a small metal object had crashed into the earth. Smoke was rising from the impact site, and the desert sand around it was still hot from the landing. Inside this strange craft, someone was waking up after a very long and difficult journey. Her name was Zara, and she was not from Earth. For 3 months, she had been traveling through the darkness of space, running away from something terrible that had happened to her home planet. She came from a world called Kepler 4b, a place that was once beautiful but had been destroyed by war and environmental disasters. She was one of the lucky few who managed to escape, but her journey had been anything but easy. As Zara slowly opened her eyes, she felt weak and dizzy. Her escape pod was damaged and filled with smoke. The food machine that was supposed to keep her fed during the long trip had broken weeks ago, leaving her with nothing to eat. She had been surviving on emergency rations that ran out days before reaching Earth, and now her body was shutting down from hunger. Zara looked almost human, but there were small differences that made her stand out. Her skin had a slight blue tint to it, like moonlight on snow. Her eyes were a bit larger than normal human eyes, and they seemed to glow softly in the dark. She was beautiful in a way that seemed otherworldly, like something from a dream or a fairy tale. With great effort, she managed to get out of her damaged ship. The desert air hit her face, dry and warm. She had studied Earth before making this journey, and she knew this was supposed to be a safe place where she could start over. But as she looked around at the empty desert stretching in every direction, she felt more alone than ever. Zara had a small device attached to her ear that could translate any language. It was one of the few pieces of technology that still worked after the crash. She knew she needed to find people, food, and shelter quickly, or she would not survive much longer. Following some tired tracks in the sand, she walked for hours under the hot sun. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, but she kept moving because stopping meant certain death. Finally, as the sun was setting, she saw lights in the distance. It was Silver Springs, a small town with a few hundred people. Gas stations, diners, and shops. The first person she met was an old man sitting outside a gas station. When she approached him and asked for help, he looked at her strangely. Her clothes were torn from the crash, and she looked exhausted and dirty. But it was something else about her that made him uncomfortable. Maybe it was the way she walked, or how her eyes seemed to catch the light differently, or perhaps the slight accent in her voice that the translator couldn't quite hide. "I need food, please," she said simply, her voice weak but polite. "I can work for it, or trade something." The old man shook his head and walked away quickly, muttering something about strange people coming to town. Zara didn't understand why. He seemed afraid of her, but she was too hungry and tired to think about it much. She tried the diner next. The smell of food coming from inside made her stomach hurt with hunger. She had not eaten anything substantial in over a week, and her alien body was reacting even worse to starvation than a human's would. But when she walked through the door, conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at her, and she could feel their stares like physical weight. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, seemed like she wanted to help at first. But when Zara got closer, something about her appearance made the woman step back. Maybe it was the way Zara moved, too graceful and fluid for a normal human. Or perhaps it was her skin, which seemed to have a subtle shimmer under the diner's fluorescent lights. We're closed," the waitress lied, even though there were other customers still eating their meals. Zara tried to explain that she just needed a small amount of food, that she could pay or work for it, but the woman just shook her head and pointed to the door. The other customers whispered among themselves, and Zara heard words like weird, creepy, and not from round here. As she left the diner, her heart sank. She had expected Earth to be different, more welcoming. On her home planet, strangers, were always offered food and shelter. It was considered a basic duty to help those in need. But here, people seemed suspicious and afraid of anyone who was different. She tried the grocery store, but the manager took one look at her and claimed they didn't hire people. Without proper identification, she went to the local church, hoping that religious people might be more compassionate, but the pastor told her to move along, saying she looked like Trouble Dot by the end of her first day in Silver Springs. Zara was weaker than ever. She found a spot behind the diner to rest, hidden among some trash cans and old boxes. The dessert got cold at night, and she shivered as she tried to sleep. Her body was starting to shut down from lack of nutrition, and she could feel herself getting sicker by the hour. The next morning brought no better luck. Word had spread through the small town about the strange woman who had appeared overnight. Some people thought she might be mentally ill or on drugs. Others wondered if she was some kind of criminal running from the law. A few teenage boys even started following her around, pointing and laughing, treating her like entertainment. Zara's situation was becoming desperate. Her alien physiology meant she could not survive as long without food as a human could. Her people needed specific nutrients that were hard to find, and her body was already starting to fail. She estimated she had maybe 2 or 3 days before she would collapse completely. On the second night, as she lay behind the diner again, Zara looked up at the stars and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps she should have stayed on her dying planet and faced whatever fate awaited her there. At least she would have died among her own people, not alone and rejected by strangers who saw her as nothing more than a nuisance. But she was not ready to give up yet. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new people to meet. Someone in this town had to have compassion. Someone had to be willing to see past her differences and recognize that she was just a person in need of help. She just had to survive long enough to find that person. Part 2. Desperate Measures. Be the third day in Silver Springs. Zara could barely stand up. Her body was shutting down in ways that would kill her much faster than it would a human. Her alien metabolism required specific nutrients that she couldn't find anywhere in this small town, and the constant rejection from the townspeople was wearing down her spirit, as much as hunger was destroying her body. She had spent another sleepless night behind the diner, shivering and trying to ignore the pain in her stomach. When morning came, she knew this might be her last chance to find help. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was getting blurry, and she could feel her heart beating irregularly. On her home planet, she had seen others die from starvation during the war, and she recognized the signs. Desperation makes people do things they never thought they would do. As Zara stumbled through the main street of Silver Springs, she tried to think of anything she could offer in exchange for food. Back on her planet, it was common for travelers to trade services or companionship for necessities. People helped each other survive, and it was considered normal to offer whatever you had in exchange for what you needed. But Zara didn't understand how different Earth culture was, especially in a small, conservative town like Silver Springs. She approached a businessman walking out of the bank, a well-dressed man who looked like he had money. Her translator helped her find the right words, but her understanding of human customs was limited. "Sir, please," she said, her voice weak but still polite. "I haven't eaten in days. I can offer you companionship, friendship, or help with anything you need, just for some food." The man's face turned red with anger and disgust. He stepped back like she had some kind of disease. "What kind of person do you think I am?" he shouted, loud enough for other people on the street to hear. "Get away from me." Zara was confused by his reaction. She had only offered friendship and help, the same thing anyone might offer back home. But she could see that somehow she had said something wrong. Other people were starting to stare and point at her. Next, she tried talking to a woman coming out of the grocery store. "Ma'am, I'm very sick and hungry. I can work for you, clean your house, or just be a friend. Please, just a little food." The woman looked horrified and hurried away, but not before calling out to others nearby. "That strange woman is bothering people again." Someone should call the sheriff. Word spread quickly through Silver Springs. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, news traveled fast. People started saying that the weird-looking stranger was making inappropriate offers to respectable citizens. They didn't understand that Zara was simply offering any kind of help or service she could provide, including basic human companionship and friendship. The sheriff, a large man with a permanent frown, found Zara sitting on a bench outside the post office. She was so weak she could barely lift her head when he approached. "I've been getting complaints about you," he said, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. "People say you're bothering folks, making strange offers. What's your story, lady?" Zara tried to explain that she was just looking for food and was willing to work for it, but her words came out wrong again. The translator was working perfectly, but it couldn't bridge the gap between two completely different cultures. "I just need help," she whispered. "I can offer friendship, companionship, any service you need. I'm not a bad person." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is a decent town with decent people. We don't want your kind of trouble here. You better move along before I have to arrest you for disturbing the peace." Zara wanted to tell him the truth about where she came from and why she was really there, but she knew he would never believe her, even if he did believe her. She had no idea how humans would react to learning that aliens were real. She had seen enough fear in people's eyes already. As the day went on, things got worse. A group of teenagers had started following her around, laughing and making jokes. They threw small rocks at her and called her names when she stumbled and fell because of her weakness. They just laughed harder instead of helping her up. "Look, the crazy lady can't even walk straight," one of them shouted. "Maybe she's on some kind of drugs," another one said. "My dad says she's been bothering people all over town." Even worse than the teenagers were the adults who simply ignored her completely. When she collapsed on the sidewalk outside the pharmacy, people just walked around her like she was a piece of trash. A mother pulled her small child away when the little boy tried to ask if Zara was okay. The local pastor, who she had hoped might show more compassion, actually made things worse. He started telling people that Zara might be possessed by evil spirits or sent by the devil to test their faith. He encouraged everyone to stay away from her and pray for protection from her influence. By evening, Zara had become the town's main topic of conversation. People were making up stories about her, each one more wild than the last. Some said she was an escaped mental patient. Others thought she might be a criminal hiding from the law. A few even suggested she could be some kind of spy or terrorist. But nobody, not a single person, considered that she might just be a hungry, desperate person who needed help. As the sun set on her third day in Silver Springs, Zara found herself back behind the diner, weaker than ever. She had not eaten anything in over a week, and her body was starting to shut down completely. Her alien physiology meant that starvation affected her differently than it would a human. Her skin was losing its blue tint and becoming pale and gray. Her eyes, which had once glowed softly, were becoming dull and lifeless. She tried to stay awake, knowing that if she fell asleep now, she might never wake up. But her body was demanding rest, and her mind was becoming foggy from malnutrition. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, she thought about her home planet and the family she had lost in the war. At least they had died quickly, she thought. This slow death from hunger and rejection seemed so much worse. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was the sound of a motorcycle engine in the distance, getting closer to the town, but she was too weak to care about new rivals. Her fight for survival was almost over, and she had lost. Part 3. The unlikely Scifi, or the sound of the motorcycle, grew louder as it entered Silver Springs. Just after midnight, the rider was tired after driving for hours across the desert highways, looking for a place to rest and get some food. His name was David, and he was the kind of person who minded his own business and expected others to do the same. David was 34 years old and had spent most of his adult life serving as a medic in the military. He had seen war, poverty, and suffering. In places most people couldn't imagine. After leaving the army, he couldn't settle down in one place. Instead, he traveled from town to town on his motorcycle, taking odd jobs and trying to find some peace in the quiet roads of America. He pulled into the parking lot of the only motel in Silver Springs that still had its lights on. The place looked old and worn down, but it would do for one night. As he got off his bike and stretched his sore muscles, he noticed how quiet the town was. Most small towns were peaceful at night, but this place felt different somehow, like there was tension in the air. After checking into his room, David realized he was hungry. The motel clerk told him the only place that might still have food was the all-night diner down the street. David grabbed his jacket and walked through the empty streets, enjoying the cool desert air after the hot day. As he got closer to the diner, he heard a sound that made him stop. It was faint, but his military training had taught him to notice things others might miss. Someone was breathing heavily, like they were in pain or having trouble getting enough air. David followed the sound around to the back of the diner, where the garbage cans were kept. What he saw there made his heart skip a beat. A young woman was lying on the ground, barely conscious, her skin pale and her breathing shallow. She was clearly in serious medical trouble, but there was something strange about her appearance that David couldn't quite understand. Her skin had an unusual tint to it, and her eyes seemed to reflect light in a way that wasn't quite normal. However, David's medical training kicked in immediately. He had learned long ago that when someone was dying, you help them first and ask questions later. "Hey, can you hear me?" he said softly, kneeling down beside her. "My name is David. I'm going to help you." Sarah's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she thought she might be dreaming. A stranger was talking to her with kindness in his voice, something she hadn't heard since arriving in this town. She tried to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper. "Please," she managed to say. "I'm so hungry." David could see she was suffering from severe malnutrition. He had seen similar cases during his military service in places where food was scarce. But there was something else going on with her body that he couldn't identify. Her pulse was different from what he expected, and her skin temperature wasn't quite right. "When did you last eat?" he asked, checking her pulse and looking at her eyes with a small flashlight he always carried. "Many days," Sarah whispered. "Maybe 7 or 8. I lost count." David knew that a normal person couldn't survive that long without food and still be conscious. Either she was wrong about the time, or there was something very unusual about her physiology. But right now, the important thing was getting nutrition into her system before she went into complete organ failure. "I'm going to carry you to my motel room," he said gently. "You need food and water right away. Don't try to talk, just conserve your energy." As David lifted Zara in his arms, he was surprised by how light she felt, almost like she weighed less than she should. Her body temperature was also cooler than normal. But he pushed these observations aside. His priority was keeping her alive. The motel clerk looked suspicious when David carried the unconscious woman through the lobby. But David's military bearing and serious expression discouraged any questions. Once in his room, he propped Zara up on the bed and went to work. From his travel bag, he pulled out a basic medical kit that he always carried. He also had some energy bars and bottled water that he kept for emergencies. David knew that someone who had been starving for days couldn't handle regular food right away. So he started by giving her tiny sips of water mixed with sugar. "Small amounts," he said softly as she began to wake up more. "Your stomach needs to adjust slowly." Over the next few hours, David carefully monitored Zara's condition while giving her small amounts of easily digestible food. He noticed things about her that didn't make sense medically, but he had learned in the military not to question everything he couldn't understand. Her body seemed to process the food differently than a human's would. Her recovery was faster than expected, but her reactions to certain foods were unusual. When he gave her some crackers, she seemed to absorb the nutrients almost immediately. But when he offered her some meat, her body rejected it completely. "What's your name?" David asked when she was finally able to sit up on her own. Sarah, she said quietly, still not trusting this sudden kindness. Well, Sarah, you're going to be okay. But I need to know what happened to you. How did you end up behind that diner, nearly dead from starvation? Sarah looked into David's eyes and saw something she hadn't seen since arriving on Earth. There was no fear, no suspicion, no judgment, just genuine concern for another person's well-being. She wanted to tell him the truth, but she wasn't sure he would believe her. The people in this town, she said carefully, they don't like strangers. They wouldn't give me food or work. I tried everything I could think of. David's expression darkened. He had seen how some small towns treated outsiders, especially those who looked different or didn't fit in. It reminded him of some of the prejudice he had witnessed during his military service. What did you offer them in exchange for food? He asked. Friendship, companionship, any kind of help or work, Sarah said. Where I come from, it's normal to offer whatever you can in exchange for help when you're desperate, David nodded, understanding immediately how her innocent offers could have been misinterpreted by narrow-minded people. He had seen this kind of cultural misunderstanding before, and it always ended badly for the person who was already vulnerable. Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore, David said firmly. You're safe now. Tomorrow, we'll get you some proper medical attention and figure out what to do next. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a spark of hope. This stranger had shown her more kindness in a few hours than the entire town had shown her in 3 days. Maybe there were good people on Earth after all. Maybe she could survive here and build a new life. But she still hadn't told David the truth about where she really came from. And she wasn't sure how he would react when he learned that she wasn't human at all. Part 4. Trust and truth. Over the next 3 days, David took care of Sarah like she was family. He bought her clothes from the local store, ignoring the strange looks from the shopkeeper who recognized her as the troubled woman from earlier. He made sure she had regular meals, small portions at first, then gradually increasing as her body grew stronger. What amazed David most was how quickly Sarah recovered. In his medical experience, someone who had been starving for over a week should have taken much longer to bounce back. But Sarah seemed to heal at an incredible rate. Her skin regained its color, her eyes became bright again, and her energy returned faster than should have been possible. There were other things about Sarah that didn't quite add up, but David had learned not to ask too many questions during his time in the military. He had met people from all over the world, and everyone was different in their own way. Some people healed faster, some had unusual reactions to medicine, and some just didn't fit the normal patterns doctors expected. Sarah, meanwhile, was struggling with feelings she had never experienced before. Back on her home planet, people helped each other because it was expected, part of their culture. But David was helping her without expecting anything in return, without even knowing who she really was. His kindness felt pure and genuine in a way that touched her heart. She wanted to tell him the truth about herself, but she was terrified of how he might react. What if he became afraid of her like everyone else? What if he stopped helping her and left her alone again? The thought of losing the only friend she had on this entire planet was almost too scary to consider. On the 4th morning, as they sat in the diner having breakfast, Sarah noticed how the other customers whispered and pointed at them. The waitress who had refused to serve her before was now being polite, but only because David was with her. The townspeople were clearly unhappy about David's presence and his decision to help the strange woman they all wanted gone. They don't like me, Sarah said quietly, picking at her eggs, and now they don't like you either because you're helping me. David looked around the diner and saw the hostile faces staring at them. I've dealt with narrow-minded people before, he said calmly. Their opinions don't concern me. What concerns me is making sure you're okay. But why? Sarah asked, genuinely confused. You don't know anything about me. I could be a bad person. I could be dangerous. David smiled and took a sip of his coffee. I've been around dangerous people, Sarah. I know what they look like, how they act, what they feel like to be around. You're not dangerous. You're just different, and some people are afraid of different. That afternoon, The sheriff came to their motel room. He was clearly upset and wanted David to understand the situation from the town's perspective. "Look, mister," the sheriff said, "I don't know what this woman told you, but she's been causing problems here, making inappropriate offers to decent people, bothering folks who just want to be left alone." David listened patiently, then asked, "What exactly did she offer them?" "Well, she offered companionship and services in exchange for food," the sheriff said, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. "You mean she offered to work for food?" David asked. "Or to be friendly with people in exchange for help when she was starving?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't like that. It was inappropriate." David had heard enough. "Sheriff, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This woman was dying of hunger, and she offered to work or be friendly in exchange for basic necessities. Where I come from, we call that survival, not inappropriate behavior." After the sheriff left, still grumbling about outsiders and troublemakers, Zara felt even worse about the situation. She could see that David was starting to face problems because of her, and she knew it would only get worse if she stayed. "Maybe I should leave," she said that evening as they walked around the edge of town. "You've done so much for me already. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." "Where would you go?" David asked. "Do you have family somewhere? Friends who could help you?" Zara was quiet for a long moment. This was her chance to tell him the truth, but the words felt stuck in her throat. "How do you tell someone that your family is dead, your planet is destroyed, and you're completely alone in the universe?" "I don't have anyone," she said finally. "My family. They're all gone. I'm completely alone." David stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, he could see tears in her eyes, and something about her sadness seemed deeper than normal grief. It was the kind of loss he had seen in war refugees. People who had lost not just family members, but their entire way of life. "What happened to them?" he asked gently. "There was a war," Zara said, which was true, "and environmental disasters. My whole community was destroyed. I had to run away to survive." David nodded, understanding more than Zara realized. He had worked with refugees before, people who had lost everything and had to start over in strange places where nobody understood their culture or background. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, Zara made a decision. David had been nothing but kind to her, and she owed him honesty. She couldn't keep lying to the one person who had shown her compassion, but she also couldn't just blurt out that she was from another planet. She needed to prepare him gradually. "David," she said as they sat outside the motel room, looking up at the stars, "what if I told you something that sounded impossible? Something that you might not believe at first?" David followed her gaze up to the night sky. "I've seen a lot of impossible things in my life, Zara. War makes you realize how much we don't understand about the world. What if I told you that I'm not exactly like other people? That I'm different in ways that go beyond just culture or background?" David looked at her carefully. He had already noticed things about her that didn't quite fit normal human patterns. Her healing rate, her unusual reactions to certain foods, the way her eyes seemed to catch light differently. He had been wondering about these things but hadn't wanted to pry. "I'd say that everyone is different in their own way," he said carefully. "And I want to know what makes you feel like you're so different from everyone else." Zara took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. Either David would accept her for who she really was, or she would lose the only friend she had on Earth. "What if I told you," she said slowly, "that I'm not from anywhere on this planet? Then I came here from somewhere very, very far away." David was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had just said. Then he looked up at the stars again, as if seeing them differently. "I'd say that would explain a lot of things I've been wondering about," he said softly. "And I want to know more about where you came from and how you got here." For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zara smiled a real, genuine smile. Maybe there was hope after all. Part 5. A new beginning. The morning after Zara's confession, David woke up with 1,000 questions running through his mind. She had told him the truth about being from another planet, and somehow it all made sense. All the strange things he had noticed about her, her unusual healing, her different reactions to food. The way she moved and spoke, everything finally had an explanation. But what amazed him most was that he wasn't afraid. Maybe it was his military training, or maybe it was just the kind of person he was. But David found himself more curious than scared. He had always believed that the universe was too big for Earth, to be the only planet with life on it. When Zara woke up, she looked nervous and worried. She had spent half the night wondering if David would still be there in the morning, or if he would have run away after thinking about what she had told him. "Good morning," David said with a smile, handing her a cup of coffee. "Sleep okay?" Zara was surprised by how normal he was acting. "You're still here," she said quietly. "Of course I'm still here. Why would I leave?" "Because I told you what I really am. Because I'm not human. Because I'm from a place you've never heard of, and I came here in a spaceship that crashed in your desert." David sat down beside her on the motel room's small couch. "Zara, yesterday you were a person in need of help. Today you're still a person in need of help. The fact that you're from another planet doesn't change that." Over breakfast, Zara told David everything. She explained about her home planet, Kepler 442b, and how it had been destroyed by wars and environmental disasters. She described her escape in a small ship, the 3-month journey through space, and the crash landing that had brought her to Earth. "My people look similar to humans," she explained. "That's why I can blend in mostly, except for small differences that some people notice." David listened to every word, asking questions that showed he was taking her seriously. "How many of your people escaped?" "Not many," Zara said sadly. "Maybe a few hundred out of millions. Some went to other planets, but I chose Earth because our scientists said it was the most similar to our home world." "And you're all alone here?" "As far as I know, yes. The others who chose Earth might have landed in different places, if they made it at all." David was quiet for a moment, thinking about how incredibly brave and alone Zara must feel. "What was your plan when you got here?" "I was hoping to find a place where I could fit in. Maybe find work, build a new life. I studied human culture before I left, but I guess I didn't understand how different things would be in a small town like this." Just then, there was a loud knock on the motel room door. David looked through the window and saw several government vehicles parked outside. Men in dark suits were standing around, and they looked very serious. "David," Zara whispered, her face turning pale. "I think someone found out about me." David's military instincts kicked in immediately. "Stay calm. Let me handle this." When he opened the door, a tall woman in a government suit was standing there with several agents behind her. She looked professional but not unfriendly. "Are you David Chen?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Dr. Lisa Rodriguez. I work for a special government research program. We understand you're harboring someone who might be of interest to us." David stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "What kind of interest?" "The kind that could be very important for the future of humanity," Dr. Rodriguez said. "We've been monitoring unusual activity in this area. A crash site in the desert, strange energy readings, and reports of someone with unusual characteristics showing up in town." David realized that they somehow knew about Zara's ship and possibly about her true identity. He had to make a quick decision about whether to trust these people or try to protect Zara from them. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked. "Someone who might not be from around here," Dr. Rodriguez said carefully. "Someone who might need our help and protection." Something in the woman's tone made David think she might actually want to help rather than harm Zara. But he had to be sure. "And what would happen to this person if you found them?" "That would depend on what they wanted," Dr. Rodriguez said. "If they were peaceful and needed assistance, we would provide it. If they had information that could help humanity prepare for future contact with their people, we would be very interested in working with them." David made his decision. "Give me a minute." He went back inside and explained the situation to Zara. She was terrified at first, but David convinced her that hiding forever wasn't a realistic option. Eventually, someone would figure out the truth, and it was better to deal with it on their own terms. "Dr. Rodriguez seems different from the other government people I've met," David said. I think she might actually want to help. 20 minutes. Later, Zara was sitting in a government facility talking to Dr. Rodriguez and a team of scientists. Instead of treating her like a prisoner or an experiment, they treated her like a guest. They offered her food, comfortable clothing, and medical care. Dr. Rodriguez explained that her organization had been preparing for the possibility of contact with alien life for years. They had protocols in place to protect and assist any peaceful visitors to Earth. We're not interested in exploiting you or using you for experiments, Dr. Rodriguez assured Zara. We're interested in learning from you and helping you build a life here, if that's what you want. And what about helping my people? Zara asked. There might be others who escaped from my planet. They might need a safe place to come. That's exactly the kind of thing we're hoping to discuss with you, Dr. Rodriguez said. Earth could potentially offer sanctuary to refugees from your world. But we need to understand your people better first. Over the following weeks, Zara worked with Dr. Rodriguez's team to establish formal contact protocols. She shared information about her people's culture, technology, and needs. While learning more about Earth and human society, David stayed with her throughout the process, serving as her advocate and friend. The government offered him a job as a liaison between humans and potential alien refugees, which gave him a sense of purpose he had been missing since leaving the military. Months later, the first official refugee ship from Zara's planet arrived. On Earth, thanks to the groundwork Zara and David had laid, the arrival was peaceful and organized. The refugees were given safe places to live and opportunities to contribute to human society. With their advanced knowledge, Zara became Earth's first alien ambassador, helping other refugees adjust to life on their new planet while also serving as a bridge between two very different species. She found not just survival on Earth, but purpose and belonging. The people of Silver Springs eventually learned the truth about the strange woman they had rejected. Some felt ashamed of how they had treated her, while others struggled to accept the reality of what had happened in their small town. But most came to understand that they had witnessed something historic, the first peaceful contact between humans and beings from another world. David often thought about that night when he found Zara dying behind the diner. One simple act of kindness had changed both of their lives and possibly the future of humanity itself. It proved that sometimes the most important moments in history start with just one person deciding to help another person in need.